Welcome. I'd really appreciate if you could drop a comment with your thoughts and reactions as you listen. Your feedback helps me craft better stories for you. Jake Wells gathered his courage as he looked up at the plain brick building. The ad on Craigslist said to come by yourself and to call this number to ask for Brian. Jake had lost his plant job a month ago and was looking for any job he could find. He walked up to the steel door and hit it hard with his fists, making a loud noise. No one picked up. After a short pause, Jake knocked again, this time more strongly. At last, he heard footsteps coming from inside. A rusty squeal came from the door as it opened. Someone tall with a hood looked down at him. I asked, "What do you want?" The man's face was hidden by the hood. "Hi, my name is Jake, and I'm here about the job posting," Jake said, his voice shaking from nerves. The man in the hood stared at him blankly for a long time before stepping back without saying anything. Jake walked into the empty foyer with a racing heart. With a scary noise, the man shut the door behind them. "This way," the guy said in a rude voice, pointing for Jake to follow. They went up a dark set of stairs that smelled musty and damp. Jake's shoes made noise on the concrete steps. There was a single steel door at the top of the stairs. The man in the hood rapped out a strange pattern of knocks. After a moment of silence, the door creaked open, revealing another person in a mask. Figure 2 looked at Jake, nodded, and turned away down a dark hallway. Jake looked at the first man with some doubt. He got a jerk of the head that didn't say anything but told him to follow. Jake was nervously following the second figure as it made its way through the maze of empty halls. Suddenly, they came to a door that wasn't marked. Figure 2 opened it and told Jake to go inside. A single wooden desk was the only thing in the small office that didn't have any windows or paint. Behind it, there was another man in a hat. "Have a seat," the man said, pointing to the broken-down chair next to him. Jake took a slow, steady breath. "I'm Brian. What kind of work you looking for?" Even though Brian was being friendly, Jake felt uncomfortable when the featureless hood looked at him. "Anything, really. I'm just trying to make some money until I can find steady work again." Brian slowly agreed. "I think I might have something that could work for you. How do you feel about making deliveries around town?" Jake wasn't sure. What would I be delivering? "It's okay. Don't worry about the details," Brian said. "All you gotta do is take some packages from point A to point B. Easy money." Brian leaned forward carefully because he could tell Jake was still having doubts. "Look, I understand your situation ain't easy right now, but I'm offering you an opportunity here. You in or out?" Jake didn't have any other options outside of this small room. He had to get the money as quickly and properly as possible. "I'm in. What do you need me to do?" he asked after taking a deep breath. Brian smiled, and the movement made his hooded face look very strange. "Excellent decision. Tonight you'll be picking up a package from my associates. I'll text you the meetup spot in a few hours." "Sound good?" Jake slowly nodded. He was feeling both relieved and scared at the same time. As he got up to leave, Brian said, "Don't leave us waiting." This made him feel cold. Jake felt uneasy as he left the scary building after the experience. He went to the closest coffee shop and sipped his coffee while looking through his phone nonstop to calm down. Brian's mysterious text finally came through. An empty building on the edge of town at midnight. Jake got there with a few minutes to spare. He parked far away and walked over as directed. 2 looming figures came out of the shadows. "You're the delivery boy," someone asked in a rude voice. He pushed a big duffel bag into Jake's arms without waiting for him to answer. It was heavier than I thought. With his heart racing, Jake tried to get away, but the second guy stopped him with those chilling words. "Don't leave." Big mistake. Jake quickly got to his car and drove off, fighting the urge to open the bag. Whatever was inside, he didn't want it. It was too late to change my mind, though. Jake was bored in his apartment and kept looking at the strange duffel bag that was lying on his carpet. Even though a whole night had passed, there were still no signs of what was inside. Even though he wasn't sure, his interest won out in the end. Jake slowly opened it up and took a quick look inside. He saw bright lumps of color, neat stacks of cash held together with rubber bands. There had to be a lot of money inside. But where did it come from? Why send that much money without being identified? Right then, his phone rang with a number he didn't know. Jake replied with care. "So, what do you think of the goods?" Brian's familiar machine voice came over. "Things for sale." "That's right," Jake said. "This is money." Brian laughed very loudly. "Son, where do you think money comes from? Take this as your first payment for the work you've done. If you stay true, more jobs will come your way." Jake felt a cold fear come over him as he realized he was involved in something risky. Who were these individuals, and what did they do to earn such large amounts of money? Though he knew he should call the cops, he was afraid of being hurt. So far, there was no proof of any wrongdoing. Jake couldn't sleep that night because it seemed like there were shadows everywhere. He woke up feeling tired the next morning and drove to the station on a whim, taking money with him. But when he got there, his spirit gave out. He couldn't move for more than an hour in the parking lot. How would he keep his family safe if something went wrong? In the end, survival was more important than doing what was right. Jake drove home again, this time with his bag and secrets with him. His anxiety got worse over the next week. Every lost person on the street looked at him closely. In the middle of the night, Jake woke up to a loud knock. In the dark, silhouettes hung outside his peephole. With his heart in his throat, Jake smashed open the door and saw police officers standing there gruffly. One of them said in a rude voice, "We need to ask you some questions about an ongoing investigation." It was a blurry ride to the station. Behind closed doors, two officers sat Jake down firmly and began a tense round of questioning. Strange things have been happening at your home, and one person has been accused. Could you tell me what really happened the night you said you got lost coming here? Jake felt more and more panicked, but he kept up a calm front by sticking to his made-up story. The detectives weren't satisfied and jumped on any apparent flaws. As the hours went by, Jake's resolution started to break. He finally blurted out a confession, his face wet with tears of fear and relief. The cops paid close attention to Jake's whole scary story. That means you only saw their covered bodies and never their faces, and you have no idea what was really in the bag that was given to you. One made it clear. Jake just nodded, feeling tired. "Very well," the other person said quickly. "If you're willing to help us with our investigation, you'll need to tell us where the meeting took place. If not, your life is at risk. You can leave town now, but don't go anywhere else. Another question might come up." Jake stumbled home in a daze and fell asleep right away. He was still scared and confused when he woke up the next morning. Weeks went by with no resolution, and his anxiety grew like a cancer that spread through his daily life. He always looked over his shoulder, as if he were waiting for something else to happen. One Saturday, Jake's pace made him decide on the spur of the moment to grab his keys and drive to the site of that scary handoff. As he pulled up, he had a terrible realization. There was an unmarked police sedan close, and there were two grim-faced detectives inside. The whole time, they were keeping an eye on him and waiting for him. Jake stopped moving, but the police came up to him quietly. One person said, "Son, I'm glad you could join us. Let's talk again," even though it made him sick. Jake followed them back to the station to be questioned again. This time, though, they seemed to understand better. One said in a soft voice, "We think you're an innocent victim who was used. With your help, we might be able to shut down a dangerous business that takes advantage of weak people. To fully assist now, you must look at some pictures, talk about your contacts with a sketch artist, and agree to wear a wire if necessary going forward. What do you say? Are you ready to see this through to the end for your own good and the good of others. Jake looked into the kind but hard eyes and saw himself. He was tired. Even though he had a long way to go, the first steps seemed clear at last. He took a deep breath to calm himself down and said, "I'm in." It was time for him to face his fears and take back charge of his life. There were photos of known crooks that Jake looked at for hours, but none of them matched the shadowy figures from that night. The sketch artist made eerily exact likenesses that were shown to the press, but they didn't work. Weeks went by with full cooperation with the investigation, but the ghost operators were still nowhere to be found. The mental toll got worse as time went on. Jake was always on edge and jumped at the slightest sound. I had trouble sleeping because I kept having bad dreams about that scary meeting. He thought about leaving town more than once and starting over somewhere safer with a new name. But where would the real danger end? The police told Jake that this was normal and asked him to wait. Even so, there were still doubts that his evidence alone could break up such a well-organized ring. One morning, he called the head detective, Michaels, in a panic, which made his worries even worse. Jake begged, "Please tell me you found something. Anything. I can't take this anymore." Michaels responded in a serious voice, "Son, we're doing everything we can, but this is a careful game of chess. As of right now, all I can do is guard us until the other king falls. Just keep going for a little while longer. I promise we'll get these jerks." Jake slammed the phone down in pain and broke down crying. At that time, it looked like the only way out was to pack his small bags. He couldn't take this torture any longer. A quick knock came from the door as Jake walked numbly toward it. His heart stopped. Had they already found him? Jake was scared and looked through the peephole. To his surprise, he saw Detective Michaels on the stoop with his phone to his ear, looking like he was in a hurry. Jake swung the door open in shock. "Is everything all right? What's going on?" Michaels gave a sharp nod. "Take a break. One of our C's just identified the low-level guys. You said we're going into a known drug house with a lot of weapons. I believe tonight is the night we'll catch our perps, but you need to get dressed and in the van right away. Are you ready to take the last step with us?" Jake felt hope in his chest for the first time in weeks. It was like a light of purpose. He was no longer helpless. This was his chance to make things right. Jake answered right away, "Let's go get these sons of bitches." Jake sat tensely in the surveillance van, which was tucked away in the shadows near the target. He was protected by a wire and a secret gun. Through his earpiece, the dull chatter of officers marking their places slowly became background noise. His whole mind was on the run, down Drug Dean where it all started. It felt like hours went by in the dark van. Hearing sudden shouts over the radio made Jake wonder again they were in the wrong place. Michael swore under his breath. "It looks like our criminals aren't going to give up easily." Jake's heart jumped into his throat, and he strained desperately to see anything moving through the dark windows. Finally, people came out of the house and started fighting fiercely with the police who were after them. Jake caught quick glimpses of his attackers from that night in the van's dim work lights. One of them was holding a gun. In that split second, memories took precedence over common sense. Jake yelled out loud as he jumped out of the car, brandishing his own gun. The next few events were hard to make out. In the tight alley, shots could be heard clearly. When the dust cleared, both of the hooded attackers were lying still in pools of blood that were getting bigger. The rest of the criminals had been safely restrained, but police officers were hurt in the fight. Jake stood there shaking, his numb fingers slipping off the gun as strong feelings crashed over him. Before calling for help, Detective Michaels quickly ran to him and asked quietly, "Are you hit? Son, could you tell me what happened out here?" Jake let out a rough breath as Michaels looked at him with worry. He finally got out. It's over. They can't hurt anyone else now. Then his world went dark as the adrenaline left, leaving behind a hollow wind and lasting trauma. When Jake woke up, bright lights made it hard for him to see. The clean hospital room became less clear. Michaels stayed by his bedside and smiled weakly in relief when he saw eyes that were open. Upon further examination by the doctor, Jake was found to be physically unharmed, with only temporary shock and slight exhaustion. In the weeks that followed, the case was finally over because all the criminals were either in jail or had died. Jake started putting together a new normal as he slowly got better. He still had nightmares, but they were less scary every day. He refused to live in fear. Over time, he built a support system that helped him deal with his pain. One of these was a bond with Detective Michaels that was like having a father again after a long time. Jake's 21st birthday came with the arrival of spring, which means new life. When he stepped off the front porch that sunny morning, he saw a strange car parked in the drive. Michaels walked out with an envelope in his hand and smiled as he approached. "Thought it was time you got your life back, son. Consider this a fresh start. It's all yours now if you want it." Jake opened the card and found the car keys and title papers inside. He was shaking, reading "Happy birthday. You've earned this. Keep your chin up." In writing on the pink slip made him catch his breath. With tears in his eyes, Jake hugged Michaels tightly, finally letting go of the past. Finally, a new chapter was beginning. The windows were down in Jake's old Ford as he drove down the highway in the hot summer sun. He liked the way the wind felt in his hair. He felt truly free for the first time in more than a year as the open road stretched out in front of him. Even though bad days were still coming up, the past was taking over his present more and more. It had been months since the trial that found the crime ring guilty and gave life sentences to the leaders of the group. Giving his testimony put the case to rest, but Jake's dreams were still sometimes interrupted by flashbacks to that night. By telling his story to a support group, he felt better because he knew others had been through much worse things and still made it through. Jake's own recovery was sparked by their strength. Jake's new beginning came with this trip. He used the money from selling his run down flat to drive west in search of change and self-discovery. He forgot about the memories that were hanging over every corner of the dirty city as he saw new things. Jake learned to be at peace at country diners and campsites with clear nights. Jake's car broke down in a small, hilly town that was hard to get to. As he stood by the side of the road and worked on his car in vain, a pickup truck pulled over. "Do you need a ride into town, son?" The tired driver said his name was Thomas and that he was a rancher from the area. Jake gladly took up the offer. Thomas was nice as he talked about how hard work can help a man get back on track after trouble. His simple words hit home. Maybe this place had more to offer than just beautiful views. Jake asked on a whim if the ranch needed holiday help. Thomas was shocked when he quickly agreed. Living with wide-open views and working under the big sky turned weeks into months. Jake's never-ending thoughts were taken away by the difficulties of herding animals, which made him tired but happy every night. Thomas was like a father figure because he taught responsibility by being honest and caring. Here, Jake found a reason to live instead of danger around every dark corner. As fall got closer, Thomas asked Jake to stay on for good one day. Now that the trial was over, Jake happily agreed. To improve his chances, he quickly got his GED online and then started taking classes at the community college. At night, they helped out at a homeless shelter as a way to repay Thomas's kindness. Years went by in peace and quiet in the country, with almost no problems. Jake continued to grow steadily as he worked hard and went to school. After he graduated, he got a job as a park ranger to protect the wild beauty of the area. Jake's roots grew stronger when he fell in love with a nice neighborhood teacher. Yesterday was their wedding day, and it was as sunny as a mountain sky. Thomas was smiling as the new dad. Jake stopped dancing with his friends and family to think about how far he'd come from his dark beginnings. Through going through trauma, new possibilities opened up for him and his bride to explore. Finally, Easy Street turned out not to be required. Jake was happy with the simple joys of having a purpose and being part of a community. One cool fall night, as the leaves fluttered in the wind, Jake and Thomas were happy by the fire, telling each other stories about lessons they had learned by being strong. His past now informed, but did not define him, giving him knowledge to share so that others don't fall through the cracks. Even though the wounds were still there, Jake's heart was always raised by the wild places around him. Peaceful. He knew that money would never come easy after all. Bella's day had started like any other in her modest yet cozy apartment nestled in the heart of the city. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a warm glow across the living room where her cat, Luna, usually lounged in a sunbeam. But today, Luna was nowhere to be seen. With a mug of freshly brewed coffee in hand, Bella called out, "Luna, breakfast time!" The absence of the usual clatter of paws on hardwood floors sent a ripple of unease through her. Luna, a sleek Russian blue with piercing green eyes, was more than just a pet. She was Bella's companion, her confidant in times of loneliness. Bella's apartment reflected her life. Orderly, quiet, with hints of artistic flair. Framed photographs of cityscapes and abstract paintings adorned the walls, each piece a testament to her passion for art and photography. But today, her attention was solely on finding Luna. After a thorough search of the apartment, Bella's concern escalated to panic. She threw on a light jacket and stepped outside, her heart pounding. The neighborhood was a familiar labyrinth of quaint houses and small shops. But now it felt daunting. Each alley and street corner, a potential hiding spot for Luna. As she walked, Bella's mind raced with possibilities. Luna had never strayed far before. She greeted neighbors and shopkeepers, asking if they'd seen a Russian blue cat, but their responses only deepened her worry. Hours passed, and the sun began its descent. Exhausted and disheartened, Bella returned home. Her apartment felt empty, the silence oppressive. She slumped onto the couch, her phone in hand, mindlessly scrolling through social media to distract herself from the worry gnawing at her. Then, a post on Craigslist caught her eye. Found cat, Russian blue, looking for owner. The photo showed a cat resembling Luna, perched timidly in an unfamiliar setting. A flicker of hope ignited in Bella's chest. She quickly responded to the post, her fingers trembling as she typed. The reply came swiftly. Found her wandering near the park. She's safe. Let's meet so I can return her to you. The message was signed, Chris. Relief washed over Bella, but it was tinged with unease. How had Luna ended up so far from home? And who was this Chris? As she prepared for the meeting, Bella's thoughts were a whirlwind of relief and apprehension. She had no idea that this was just the beginning of a chilling ordeal that would test her to the core. The morning sun spilled into the quaint, bustling cafe where Bella had agreed to meet Chris. She felt a tumult of emotions as she sat at a corner table, her eyes darting towards the door every few seconds. The cafe, with its warm ambience and the murmur of soft jazz, felt like a stark contrast to the storm brewing in her heart. When Chris walked in, he was not what Bella had expected. He was of average height, with an unassuming appearance, a stark contrast to the mysterious figure she had conjured in her mind. He spotted Bella and walked over with a casual smile, holding Luna securely in his arms. "Bella, I'm Chris. It's so good to finally meet you," he said, extending a hand while carefully balancing Luna. As Bella shook his hand, she felt a chill despite his friendly demeanor. There was something in his eyes, a hidden depth that she couldn't quite decipher. Luna, meanwhile, seemed unusually calm in his arms. "Thank you so much for finding her," Bella managed, her voice a mix of relief and unease. "I've been so worried." Chris smiled, placing Luna gently on Bella's lap. "I can imagine. She's a beautiful cat, wandered right up to me near the park. You must be very attached to her." The conversation flowed, but with an undercurrent of tension. Chris asked questions about Bella's life, her work, her hobbies. Each question seemingly innocent but unnervingly pointed. Bella answered, but her discomfort grew with each query. It was as if Chris already knew the answers, merely seeking confirmation. "So, you're a photographer. That's fascinating. I've always appreciated the art. Do you specialize in any particular style?" Chris inquired, his gaze unsettlingly intense. Bella nodded, trying to mask her growing suspicion. "Mostly urban landscapes and abstracts. It's more of a passion than a profession." Chris leaned in, his interest seemingly genuine. "I'd love to see your work sometime. Maybe you could show me around your favorite spots in the city." Bella hesitated, taken aback by his forwardness. "Maybe. I'm pretty busy these days." As they continued to talk, Bella couldn't shake the feeling that Chris was studying her, analyzing her responses like a puzzle to be solved. His knowledge about her life seemed more than coincidental, and a nagging voice in her head warned her to be wary. Eventually, they parted ways, Chris insisting on walking her to her car. As she drove away, Luna curled up beside her. Bella couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. Chris was still there, watching her leave, a cryptic smile on his face. That night, Bella lay in bed, unable to sleep. The meeting with Chris replayed in her mind, each detail more unsettling than the last. She cuddled Luna, seeking comfort in her purrs, but the shadows in her apartment seemed to whisper warnings she couldn't quite understand. The return of Luna brought a superficial sense of normalcy to Bella's life, but the undercurrents of unease lingered like a persistent fog. Her apartment, once a haven of solitude and comfort, now felt like a stage where unseen eyes watched her every move. Nightfall brought a chilling transformation to her home. Shadows seemed to stretch and whisper, and every creak of the old building set Bella's nerves on edge. Luna, too, was not herself. The once playful and affectionate cat was now skittish, often staring into empty corners with wide, fearful eyes. One night, as Bella lay in bed, a faint, almost imperceptible sound reached her ears, the softest scrape like a key against the lock. Her heart raced, and she strained to listen, but the silence that followed was suffocating. It wasn't the building settling. It was something or someone at her door. The following evenings were marred by similar occurrences. Unexplained sounds, the fleeting glimpse of a shadow outside her window, the unsettling feeling of being watched. Bella's thoughts inevitably returned to Chris, his probing questions, his unsettling interest in her life. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, Bella decided to confront Chris. She called him, her voice steady, but her hands trembling. "Chris, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the cafe tomorrow morning?" His response was immediate and eerily enthusiastic. "Of course, Bella. I was hoping to see you again." The cafe was bathed in the soft light of dawn as Bella sat waiting, her mind a whirlwind of suspicion and fear. When Chris arrived, his smile was disarming, but his eyes held a glint that made Bella's skin crawl. "Is everything okay, Bella? You sounded serious on the phone," Chris inquired, his tone laced with a concern that felt too practiced. Bella took a deep breath. "I need to know why you're really interested in me, Chris. Ever since Luna returned, strange things have been happening. I feel like I'm being watched." Chris's expression shifted subtly, a mask slipping. "Watched? Bella, that's concerning. But what does that have to do with me?" His feigned ignorance was like a red flag, and Bella pressed on. "I don't believe in coincidences, Chris. You knew too much about me from the start. Were you the one who took Luna?" There was a moment of silence, a heavy, suffocating silence, before Chris leaned in, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "You're a smart girl, Bella. Yes, I took Luna. I needed a way to get close to you. You see, I've been watching you for a long time." Bella recoiled, her worst fears confirmed. The man sitting across from her was not a kind Samaritan, but a stalker, his intentions dark and twisted. She felt a surge of fear, but also anger. Anger at the violation of her privacy, her safety. Chris continued, his voice a mix of obsession and delusion. I just wanted to be part of your life, Bella. You and Luna, you're both so beautiful, so perfect. I thought if I brought her back to you, you'd see. Bella stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Stay away from me, Chris. I'm going to the police. Her voice was a mix of defiance and terror. As she hurried away, Chris's voice followed her, a haunting echo. You can't get rid of me that easily, Bella. I'll always be watching. That night, Bella lay awake, her mind racing with fear. Chris's confession had unleashed a torrent of horror, the realization that her life had been invaded by a lurking shadow. She clutched Luna close, her only source of comfort in a world that now felt terrifyingly unfamiliar. Bella's world had narrowed to a single, consuming focus, to escape the suffocating grip of Chris's obsession. Each day brought a new level of paranoia. The once familiar streets of her neighborhood, now twisted into a labyrinth of fear. She could feel his eyes on her, always lurking just out of sight. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Bella's worst nightmare materialized. Returning from a quick grocery run, she sensed a presence in her apartment. Her heart pounded in her chest as she cautiously opened the door, the groceries forgotten on the floor. The apartment was shrouded in shadows, the only light coming from the flickering street lamp outside. And there, in the middle of her living room, stood Chris, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous intensity. Bella, we need to talk, Chris said, his voice eerily calm. You can't keep avoiding me. Bella's mind raced. She needed to get out, but he was blocking the only exit. Chris, you need to leave. Chris took a step forward, his expression twisting into something dark and unrecognizable. I can't do that, Bella. You're mine now. You and Luna. Panic surged through Bella, but it was quickly replaced by a fierce determination. She couldn't let this monster control her life. She had to fight back. As Chris advanced, Bella grabbed the nearest object, a heavy bookend, and swung it with all her might. The impact sent Chris staggering backward, a momentary lapse that Bella seized to dash towards the door. The chase was a blur of adrenaline and terror. Bella ran through the streets, her breath ragged, Chris's footsteps echoing behind her. She ducked into alleys, scrambled over fences, anything to put distance between them. Finally, she saw an opportunity, a crowded night market. She weaved through the throngs of people, losing Chris in the chaos. She didn't stop running until she was several blocks away, hidden in the shadow of a large building, her body shaking uncontrollably. The night air was cold against her skin, but Bella barely felt it. She was alive. She had escaped. But at what cost? Her sanctuary, her home was no longer safe. Chris's obsession had turned her life into a living nightmare. As Bella sat there, catching her breath, a deep sense of loss washed over her. She had survived, but the world she knew had been shattered. She was free, yet bound by the fear that Chris might never stop pursuing her. I've always been drawn to the peculiar and the forgotten, which is probably why I found myself scrolling through Craigslist's for sale section late one night. That's where I first saw it, a vintage leather jacket, the kind with a history you could only guess at. The ad was simple, just a photo and a price, $20. It felt almost too good to be true, but my curiosity was piqued. The next day, I met the seller, a nondescript man who seemed eager to part with it at a local coffee shop. The jacket was even more impressive in person. Worn leather with a sense of timelessness. I handed over the cash without haggling, a decision I would question in the days to come. Back at my apartment, the jacket hung on the back of a chair, looking like it had always belonged there. It was only when I slipped my hand into one of the pockets that I found something unexpected, a crumpled piece of paper. Unfolding it, I discovered a list written in hurried, almost frantic handwriting. It detailed a plan to confront someone about a heinous crime, with a specific date and address. The date was only 3 days away. A mix of intrigue and unease washed over me. Who had owned this jacket before? What was this confrontation they were planning? Was it real, or just the ramblings of a disturbed mind? The normalcy of my Craigslist purchase had suddenly taken a dark turn, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled onto something dangerous. The address on the list was in a part of town known for its forgotten corners and shadowed alleyways. I knew I should just forget about it, perhaps even turn the list over to the police. But something inside me needed to know more. This wasn't just a second-hand jacket anymore. It was a key to a mystery that was rapidly consuming my thoughts. That night, as I lay in bed, the jacket's presence in my room felt almost ominous. The list, now sitting on my nightstand, seemed to glow in the dim light. I was being pulled into a story that wasn't mine, yet I couldn't resist the pull of the unknown. By morning, I'd made up my mind. Ever since finding that list in the jacket, my nights had become restless, my days consumed by a relentless urge to uncover the truth. The address written in that frantic scrawl haunted me, an enigma I couldn't ignore. I decided to visit the neighborhood, telling myself it was just to satisfy my curiosity. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The neighborhood was nothing like mine. The buildings were older, their facades worn by time and neglect. Shadows clung to the corners, and the people moved with a weariness that spoke of hard lives. I found the address easily enough. It was a nondescript building, its windows boarded up, the front door hanging off its hinges. I returned to that place every day, watching from a distance. Each visit made my heart race, a mix of fear and anticipation coursing through my veins. I began to notice the little things, the way the light flickered in one of the upper windows at night, the occasional figure that hurried in or out, their faces always obscured. The locals seemed to avoid the building, crossing the street to pass it. Once, I mustered the courage to ask an old man about it. He looked at me, his eyes clouded with fear, and muttered, "Bad things happen there. Stay away, young one." His words sent a chill down my spine, but they also fueled my obsession. What was this place? What had happened there? At night, back in my apartment, I'd pore over the list, trying to decipher any hidden meanings, any clue that could explain the upcoming confrontation. The date was fast approaching, and with each passing day, my anxiety grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something far bigger and more dangerous than I'd imagined. The jacket lay on my chair, a constant reminder of the mystery I was entangled in. Sometimes, I'd catch myself staring at it, wondering about its previous owner. Who were they? A victim? A perpetrator? Or just someone caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? Like me? I couldn't explain it, but I felt a connection to the person who had written that list. It was as if by wearing the jacket, I had stepped into their shoes, taken on a part of their life. The line between their story and mine was blurring, and I was too deep in to turn back now. The night before the date on the list, I lay awake, the moon casting a pale light across my room. The jacket seemed to beckon me, its leather surface gleaming softly. I knew what I had to do. Tomorrow, I would go to the address at the time specified on the list. I would find out what this was all about. Fear mingled with excitement as I finally drifted into a restless sleep. I was no longer just Alex, the person who stumbled upon a mysterious list in a second-hand jacket. I was a part of the story now, a character in a plot that was rapidly spiraling towards an unknown climax. The day had come. The date marked on the list, the culmination of my sleepless nights and obsessive thoughts. I donned the jacket, feeling its weight as a sort of armor, and made my way to the address as the evening crept in, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The building seemed even more foreboding than before, its darkened windows like hollow eyes watching my approach. I found a hidden spot across the street, my heart pounding in my chest. The waiting was agonizing, every sound making me jump, every shadow a potential threat. As the appointed time drew near, a figure approached the building. The person was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a purposeful stride. They stopped at the door, looking around before disappearing inside. My breath caught in my throat. Minutes passed like hours. I strained my ears for any sound, any indication of what was happening inside. Then, suddenly, raised voices echoed through the broken windows. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Anger, accusation, fear. Without thinking, I moved closer, creeping along the building's wall. Peering through a cracked window, I saw them, two figures in a dimly lit room. The tall one from before, and another, smaller, cowering before them. The confrontation was underway. The tall figure was shouting, their voice laced with fury and disgust. "I know what you did," they yelled. "You can't hide it anymore." The other figure was pleading, their words a desperate, garbled mess. I couldn't see their face, but terror was palpable. Then, in a swift, brutal motion, the tall figure struck, sending the other crashing to the ground. The violence of the act was shocking, a stark contrast to the quiet of the night outside. I stifled a gasp, my hands trembling. The scene that unfolded was like something out of a nightmare. Accusations flew, interspersed with blows and cries of pain. The air was thick with tension and fear. And I was a silent witness to it all, unable to tear my eyes away. It was over as quickly as it had begun. The tall figure stood over the other, who was now lying motionless on the floor. There was a moment of eerie silence, and then the victor turned and walked out, their steps heavy with a mixture of triumph and disgust. I remained frozen, hidden in the shadows, long after they had gone. The reality of what I had witnessed was overwhelming. A part of me wanted to rush in, to check on the person left behind, but fear rooted me to the spot. Finally, I stumbled back into the night, the jacket heavy on my shoulders. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. I had come seeking answers, but what I found was a brutal, unsettling truth that left me reeling. As I walked home, the jacket felt like a shroud, a reminder of the darkness I had stepped into. The confrontation had been real, more real and terrifying than I could have ever imagined. And now, I was a part of it, whether I liked it or not. The days that followed the confrontation were a blur. I found myself moving through life like a ghost, the jacket now a constant companion, a symbol of the burden I carried, the violence I had witnessed replayed in my mind, a never-ending loop of brutality and despair. I considered going to the police, but what would I say? I had no evidence, no proof. My actions lurking in the shadows, spying on a building, were borderline illegal. I was trapped in a web of my own making, ensnared by my curiosity and the haunting legacy of the jacket. The jacket itself lay on my chair, a silent testament to the event. I would often find myself staring at it, lost in thought. It represented so much more than a piece of clothing. It was a link to a past I knew nothing about, a past filled with anger and pain. One evening, as I sat in my dimly lit living room, the weight of what I had experienced crushing me, I decided to revisit the address. I needed closure, something to end the cycle of nightmares and daydreams. The building was, as I remembered, desolate and foreboding, but this time there was a police car outside. My heart raced. Had someone else witnessed the confrontation, or had the body been discovered? I lingered at a distance, watching as officers moved in and out, their faces grim. I overheard snippets of their conversation. Unidentified body, no witnesses, no leads. It was like a scene from a crime show, but this was real, and I was inexplicably part of it. Returning home, I felt a mix of relief and guilt. relief that the victim's fate was being investigated, guilt that I could offer no help. The unresolved tension of the situation hung over me like a dark cloud. That night, as I lay in bed, the jacket's presence in my room felt oppressive. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was missing something, a piece of the puzzle that was just out of reach. The list, the jacket, the confrontation, they were all connected. But how? The story ended not with answers, but with questions. Questions that would haunt me, lingering in the back of my mind. I had survived, yes, but at what cost? The events I had witnessed, the secrets the jacket held, they were now a part of me, etched into my very being. As I closed my eyes, the uncertainty of it all enveloped me. The jacket, that cursed artifact of someone else's rage, lay across the room, its shadows stretching towards me, a reminder that some stories don't have neat endings. Sometimes they just linger, unresolved, leaving scars that never quite heal.